Good morning, everybody. I hope everybody hears me. Yeah, we're all set. Thank you very much for joining our session. And I hope this is the second day of the conference, and I would like to start thanking UNESCO for this incredible event, because after 2 years being in, well, lockdown, now we have a chance to have this human interaction rather than online interaction. So thank you, UNESCO team. They have done a huge job and very hard work. A lot of efforts went into it. And thank you, everybody that joined for this session. I would like to invite my distinguished panel members. And I would like to start with Dr. Bernstein-Sacker, who is a professor of higher education and the current president at University of Oslo. You would see that our panel members are representatives of different stakeholder groups, and also the diversity is not only with the stakeholders, we also brought the diversity from the global regions. The second distinguished panel member is Cynthia Jackson-Hammond, who is the president of CHIA, and she represents Northern America. We have Dr. Wundbosen Tamrat, from associate professor and the founding president of St. Mary's University in Ethiopia. It's my pleasure and honor to introduce Her Excellency Marie Victoria, the Minister of Education in Colombia. And also we have industry representation, Oscar Sala, who is the director of the CALIDAR, a technology transfer program at Mobile World Capital Barcelona. So we have a distinguished panel here, and basically what we're going to do is we're going to start with the core that matters. This is the main course we're serving to our students, the programs. And we're going to talk about how relevant it is and how and where is the quality of programs. So as a background of this, the theme 4 is one of the main themes, 10 themes in UNESCO conference, and it is about quality and relevance of programs. There has been a major study we have done to come up with the findings and then the policy recommendations. And close to the end of this conference, you will see the roadmap for 2030, where we will also see the policy recommendations, and part of it also flows from the policy recommendations we come on improving the quality and relevance of programs. So to briefly start, I would talk about the challenges that are out there, which the findings of the study, and then the panel will reflect on what is the need and why is this happening. And second half of the session will be on the policy recommendations, and we're going to see how these policy recommendations are applicable and feasible in your own regions and in your environment and in your own contexts. So to start with, I would like to invite you all to be very active. I expect it to be a very engaging session. If you have any question, if you have any addition, just don't hesitate to raise your hand, and we will definitely invite you to the floor, give you the floor for your reflections. Well, what we have done, the methodology for coming up with this study was really very robust one, and we talked to different stakeholder groups, students, alumni, faculty members, university leaders, policymakers, and industry representatives to identify the key challenges. So what do they think? And they all came from different regions in the globe. We tried to understand what are the obstacles. Why are those complaints? Why do we have always the complaints about low quality and low relevance of programs? Why we complain about the graduates coming into the market? And the problems, although we were talking about the program itself, only the program, well, the problems were multifaceted. I mean, they had multi-dimensions.
The guys are asking for you to go to the stage.
On the stage, okay, sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Better? Yeah, okay. So we were exploring the program, but we found out so many other things that are linked to the program. So without understanding the other factors, the core could not be rightly and validly appreciated. So that is why we will be talking about those issues here. Basically, what we have found out that all the stakeholders they agreed that the time-based curriculum is something that creates obstacles. We need to embrace the diversity. We have a lot of diversity of needs, diversity of learners. And I'm not saying students, but learners. And we need to make sure that we are meeting this diversity. And time-based curriculum is sort of an obstacle towards that. Theory dominated and lacking basic skills. Inadequate teaching and learning methods. And assessment methods were also highlighted as inadequate for this era. Limited opportunity for first-hand exposure to the reality, and also lack of stakeholder meaningful engagement. Well, one of the stakeholders said, well, okay, we are limiting the business, the industry engagement only with a couple of cocktail parties, and that's it. We need to go further and deeper into the collaboration with the industry and all other stakeholders. Apart from curriculum, the faculty is the core. This is the one who is serving the dish, the main course. And lack of special training for the faculty was highlighted as #1 problem, because they are all specialists in their own fields, but when it comes to delivering that subject-specific area to the student, the teaching, learning, and assessment methodologies are the core that cause problems. Well, a lot of faculty was talking about promotion being based purely on research, which makes them work more on research rather than teaching and learning methodologies, which is also an obstacle. Inadequate compensation policy, limited opportunity for industry exposure, and it also partly relates to the government regulations too, who are actually restricting different types of diversity of engagement and diversity of industry engagement. And regulations preventing this engagement were mentioned in many settings globally. And then we talked to the regulators. And so basically the regulators are also causing their own problems, as always. No clarity in defining the role and expectations from higher education. Higher education has changed, the paradigm changed. The whole paradigm changed. Now, in the era of information exchange, in the era of ICT, information cannot be the currency. And what we're doing, we're conveying the information yet. So we have to move. The currency of education has changed, and this is not yet clearly stated. What is the expectation from higher education? What is the role of higher education? We're expanding the expectations from a higher education, and we're talking all that it goes beyond the formal education to include non-formal and informal education. But how are we, as the regulators, embracing that diversity of provisions there? Do we consider that students are learning in a diverse way from diverse sources? Like 50 years ago, the situation was different, but we're still in the regulatory frameworks which belong to 50 years ago or more. Teaching and learning not a priority on government agenda. Of course, well, if you look at the strategic priorities of the government, ranking in top 100 within the next 5 years. This is the first one that pops up in many governments. Okay, so do we want elite institutions or do we want good systems that serve the society? Regulations prevent industry meaningful engagement. That is again coming from the regulator's perspective too. Infringed academic freedom and autonomy. When we look at the governance of higher education institutions, you would see there is a loose balance. There is very low balance between, or no balance between autonomy and accountability mechanisms that are there. Or the accountability mechanisms are loosely coupled with the autonomy that is granted. So there are a lot of issues that also create obstacles for the programs. Well, higher education institutions, Well, all the representatives they agreed that there was not enough investment from higher education institutions to upgrade their programs, to revise their programs, and come up with the ones that are to promote the relevance. Non-adequately equipped higher education institutions to face the challenges. Lack of data. This is something that was like a red line across all the discussions. Data-driven decision-making is not there, because what the systems are suffering from is from the lack of the data. Limited stakeholder engagement again, and there is a need to reimagine what is the role of leadership. The leadership and the governance of the higher education institutions does need a major revision. Industry and professional associations, we also talk to them, and what comes with the obstacles is that, well, basically industry and higher education institutions, they don't trust each other and they don't talk the same language. They don't understand each other. When the industry sets a need, it takes a higher education institution at least 7 years to produce the graduate. And then we end up with a graduate whose skills are no longer relevant to the needs. So how to make sure that this gap is filled in? Mega contribution from the professional associations. Apart from Europe and apart from US, Northern America, in all other regions, professional associations seem to be caring more for the professionals rather than the profession. This was the major outcry coming, and they're not working hard to promote the profession itself. And lack of subject-specific standards. When you look at the predominantly quality assurance standards globally, you would see that predominantly they are generic standards. Systems are using generic standards to evaluate the programs, whereas we need the subject-specific standards to understand the learning outcomes, achievement of the learning outcomes, the relevance of the learning outcomes. Very few systems are evaluating that one. Last but not least one, education systems. When you look at the overall education systems, we all come up with different types of reforms. I mean, reforms are popping up in the government agenda every now and then. And to make the reforms, all the reforms, diversity of reforms across all the levels, coherent and consistent and make them complement and supplement each other is a major problem. And what we're ending up with, patches all over the system, and we're ending up having a Frankenstein monster effect at the system level, because different reforms could be contradicting each other rather than complementing and supplementing each other. So with this, these are the major findings, and I would like to give the floor to our distinguished panel here to express their views from different stakeholder and regional perspectives. And the floor first goes to the industry representation. Oscar, the floor is yours.
Good morning, Susanna. Thanks for your fantastic presentation. Good morning. Hi, all. Welcome to the city. It's my pleasure to follow this fantastic, spectacular conversation with a lot of different angles. My name is Oscar Sala. I'm serving at Mobile Capital Foundation. This is a private public initiative created 10 years ago to take advantage of something that happened in 2012. Barcelona was elected to host Mobile World Congress that period of time. But in that moment, as you can imagine, in 2012, the world was quite different, okay? But we were very convinced that mobility, internet, technology will change the way that we had relations with each other. No? And I do not need to convince today you that internet and mobile is everywhere, okay? It's part of our lives. And this, comparing to this event, happens in Shanghai, happens in Los Angeles, and from the beginning, we were very convinced that this 3 days event that brings to the city nearly 120,000 people in Barcelona, and Barcelona is 5 times bigger than in Shanghai and 3 times than Los Angeles, perhaps because this position, strategic position in this technology race of Europe against China and the States, we were very convinced that we had to create the conditions the 36 days of the year. Okay, and it's what we do. We work an alliance, a public and private alliance, Our board is represented by Nadia Calviño, Vice President of in Spain, by Barcelona City Council, Catalonia government, and part of the industry, that we are very convinced that we have a huge opportunity to connect these global ecosystems during all the year. Pushing what? Creating the conditions to transform our society, improving people's life thanks to the use of technology in the right way. So we have mainly 4 programs that are our key recipes to change things. One program oriented to reduce digital talent gap. I think these days we are going to talk a lot about that. I'm going to come back to this conversation. Another program is about technology, to use technology. In this case, I'm talking about 5G, 6G, technology that will change things that how are we doing today. And in this case, in this program, we're taking advantage of Spain. Is one of the most the countries in Europe where they have most connectivity in 5G. So we are, through pilots, we are helping to understand the industry and the researchers in this case to speak in different languages. Technology that is really improving real things. So in this case, what we have done is really spectacular initiative. So enabling telesurgery, an ambulance that's converting into operating room, or something related to health, mobility, this kind of, so connectivity and agility. What will be useful for? Third program is something called Digital Future Society, a think tank that we are very aware that the technology enhance different things of addressing current problems, okay? But we need to set the barriers, the rules. The future of health will be about processing our anonymized data. What will happen with intimacy, with our privacy? So we need to learn how to do things in the right way. So to do that, what we have done is create a digital think tank. It's called Digital Future Society, to involve the right stakeholders, regulators, as you were mentioning, governments, corporates, researchers, entrepreneurs, working together. And the third and the last is the program I lead, innovation. I'm connecting all the dots during all the year with a specific angle, and it's one of the learnings that we have found out these 2 years of pandemic. What happens when instead of using technology, you build from tech possibilities, from research, transforming our knowledge into real market value? Is what we do in a program called Quality. So before going ahead, and Susana has asked me to provoke you a little bit, apologize, I will do my best, okay? So let me share with you that you are starting something big today. Steve Jobs said that your life is a collection of dots that are connected. And everything is about community. Corporates, industry, investors, special people talking to people. So I'm sure that these 2-3 days of this community will help to connect us from today to the future. Okay? So I'm going back to the presentation. So I guess that I don't need to convince you that technology has changed the way that we connect with people, we fall in love, we meet, we do our jobs, no? And our life is digital today. Let's Google in 1 minute time what happens on the internet, no? And has changed a lot of things. Have changed that today we are able to have global conversations. Sorry, if you permit me, thanks, okay. And for corporate perspective, they have changed completely things. They need to use technology not to be more efficient, to survive. They need to use technology to behave and operate in a global context. And let's Google only who dominated the world 20 years ago. These guys are completely different than today, no? And pandemic has accelerated this digital transformation of society. Digitization is not an opportunity. You know, it's an option, sorry, it's a must. If we analyze what has happened these 2-3 years of pandemic, we have analyzed different interesting things. First of all, digital internet, our life is digital. Has changed everything. We are able to have global conversations today. Every minute, there are 7,000 Zooms a year. Every minute, 7,000 Zooms, Teams, Zooms, wherever, it doesn't matter. Okay, it means that in 1 month time, we will be able to talk each other, all the world population. Secondly, digitization is not an option. Those countries, those corporates that are more digitized, they are doing better. And they're creating not richness for their pockets, they are richness for their society, for their citizens. And in addition to that, those countries that have a permanent conversation between market and research, their knowledge and their industry, setting their breaches, they are more competitive. And they're doing better. And they have a competitive, sustainable advantage. This is the case of China. This is the only country that grows in 2020. This is the case of the States. Then in the European scale, we have a crisis in 12.8 that Europe hasn't get rid of that crisis. States in 2 years' time were over. Look at that economy. But in addition to that, for me comes to my mind that we have an obligation, all the people that were involved, thinking, not in the short term, in the midterm, on the long term. We need to be sure that no one is left behind. We are one in the moment of life, in one of our society. We are the only generation that we are responsible for we're going to have with our environment, with our lives, with our citizens. And coming back to my conversations where global collaborations are today possible, thanks to technology, we are not ever capable to address solutions in a different way. For example, regarding to pandemic vaccine development, thanks to current technology, we were able to develop a vaccine 5 years before than the last century, 5 to 10 years. Okay? Imagine what will be useful to do working together. Instead of changing the answer for a specific solution, we need to have a different question, to address different needs. But from other point of view, thanks to these global collaborations, we have come to the beginning of the humanity. You see? Because global collaborations it means different cultures, diversity. So, and humanity has been good at setting barriers to defend with each other. But today, we have the same problems as Babel Tower. Different languages, different cultures. We recognize people that are very similar to us. It's very easy for us to work with people that are very similar. But what happens with people that are very different to us? This is the context that we have in front of us today. And this is the context that we have corporates, of course, that need to behave different, attending, of course, today's business model. But if they don't think different, perhaps they won't disappear in 20 years. Corporates that need to understand very well that they're competing to attract, keep, reskill talent. This is about talent. This is about community. Cities worldwide are competing against talent. Let me share with you the example of Barcelona. Barcelona is one of the biggest ecosystems in Europe in terms of new innovation, number of startups. In Spain, it is the only zone in Europe with more than 5 innovation hubs, with Barcelona, Madrid, Bilbao, Sevilla. Okay, and investors, 9 of the school unicorns in Europe, competitive in salaries, in talent. Big companies are choosing our city to set their innovation labs worldwide, stress our citizens. And on the other hand, we have understood that there's a new paradigm there. Instead of doing your degree to have a job in your life, spend your life studying to have a job. This is something different today. It's a different paradigm. So education is the best tool, but we need to understand that the world has completely changed and no one should be left behind. And the higher education is the best tool to be sure that our citizens are ready for the new challenge. So I want to share with you some specific figures and afterwards to follow the conversation. If not, I don't want to have to give the opportunity to my colleagues to share their points. First of all is, okay, we are able to create a better society, but we need to be sure that we understand the new context. Digitization, first, digital skills, digital gap. There are 12,000 jobs in Europe that we don't have people prepared for that. Okay, and it's a must to prepare. And in case of Spain, we have a lot of employment rate. I wish it works. Okay, fantastic. So, and I want to share with you that we have different challenges that I'm sure, I'm just starting this debate. Afterwards, we will follow this conversation, our conversation. We have different topics that should be in your table today. Diversity as a strength. We need to train educators, corporates, people, to be ready to work with multi-age, multi-generation, multi-gender. It's super, the more people, the more diversity in the team, the more richness there's that conversation. But we are not ready for that because we are used to work with people that are very similar to us. Reskilling, upskilling society. Instead of strategic, we should promote the strategic learning, continuous strategic learning. Life has changed the last 20 years. No? Technology possibilities, new challenge. Future of health will be shifting to the treatment of diseases, for the treatment of the patients. And to do that, we will need to use technology in our DNA, for example. But it will happen in mobility, in health. So we need to promote this collaboration and competition between different corporates, different governments, such as the Finnish. They have a genomic bank where the society is sharing their data. Of course, intimacy, privacy. We need to educate, we need to regulate, we need to set different rules of the game. And the last, and I'm shifting on Susanna just to follow other conversations. The conversation is okay. We are the generation, a society of permanent, we will live in a permanent change. Life, our society, the world has changed in 20 years more than perhaps it took 5 centuries. So, and this will be part of our lives. Artificial intelligence, data as a new petrol, is something that is on the road, but we need to understand that. And we need to use and promote that they're used in the right way. So it's my pleasure to be part of this conversation. Now it's time to give back to Susanna, please. Do your best. And
thank you very much, Oscar. Very nice to hear the insights from industry. And also the key takeaways would be data, new petrol, so this is a must. I mean, this is something that is really very necessary. There was also a very good thing you have come up with, which provoked another idea with me, like joining efforts together, the stakeholders. If you look at the associations currently we work all in our own niches, higher education association, university associations, QA associations, and all other different associations, but we don't have stakeholder associations. Mm-hmm. If we bring higher education stakeholders under one association and try working together, maybe we could make some change happen. Thank you very much for that. And the floor goes to Professor Byrne to talk about the leadership. What is the perception of the higher education leadership about the obstacles and challenges? Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for inviting me. I think the background document for this session is very good. It really captures a lot of the developments that we see, and I think it's also capturing some of the dilemmas that we have to deal with. And this morning I just want to talk to 3 points that I take out from the report. But first, let me start by the relationship between quality and relevance. I used to be a higher education researcher, but now I'm part of the institutional leadership. So where you stand depends on where you sit. So I'll try to make a university perspective, not the university perspective, but a university perspective this morning. For universities, the relationship between quality and relevance is that quality comes first. Universities have nothing against relevance, but quality has to be the basic condition also to drive relevance. To have relevance without quality, I would say that's a scam, or it's at least exploiting people. So there is something about this relationship that we need to keep in mind, and for universities, it's quality comes first. That being said, and if we look into at least the things I take out from the report, is that we need to have a more variety of offerings in higher education. We need to move with greater diversification with respect to skills and competence development in higher education, and we also need to foster more flexible learning pathways. That's at least what I read out of the report. To take the first point, variety of offerings. And for me, this is really an issue where recognition and quality assurance have to play a key role. Societal trust here. If we are entering a period of transformation, trust is really the key to make it work. Yeah. If we are entering into a process of change now where you have a lot of dubious things happening and where trust goes away, it will take really a long time to re-establish it. We have trust in higher education systems in many parts of the world, and I think that's something that we need to build on. From a university perspective, universities has not always been the greatest fan of external quality assurance. But at the end of the day, I think universities do see the relevance of external quality assurance. It is something that we need as well to find out who should we trust, who should we collaborate with in the future. In this process where quality assurance agencies really need to play a key role, I would also like to argue that we need perhaps to look into the methods. In many parts of the world, we've seen a change in the methodology of quality assurance. Basically, you have two types. Either you evaluate or accredit programs, or you evaluate or accredit institutions. If you go for the program evaluation and accreditation, you are also driving a little bit of bureaucracy, because there are so many programs, there are so many offerings. If you are to have an evaluation and accreditation for every little bit, and especially if we are starting to look into microcredits, it will really be a Frankenstein monster. So I would argue that what we really need is to have a look at how can we find ways for quality assurance also to look into assuring the providers in a more easy way, at the same time keeping the standards and keeping the trust. This is one of the key dilemmas, I think. If we look into the second point, the diversification of skills and competence development, many countries around the world have adopted qualification frameworks. I think we've seen, I can't remember the number now, but it must be close to 200 countries that have some kind of qualification framework in place. And qualification frameworks are very good in structuring knowledge on the vertical dimension. Most qualification frameworks, they start with primary education and they go to upper secondary, junior high, higher education, PhD, and so forth. Some countries even include kindergarten as part of the qualification framework. So there is a logic, there is a system here on the vertical dimension. The problem with qualification frameworks these days is interdisciplinarity. If we are to focus more on relevance, if we are to be more open to what kind of qualifications that enable you to do some kind of job or to go into a special kind of position, you may need qualifications coming from different levels in the qualification framework. So I would argue that what we really need to develop and think about also in the future is the horizontal dimension of qualification frameworks. How qualifications coming from different levels can be combined and where we also find and establish some kind of legitimacy for the interdisciplinary competence that we really need. Not only the level, but also the horizontal dimension. Final point in this introduction is flexibility. Of course we want flexibility. Everyone wants flexibility. The question is what gives us flexibility? The irony is that standards gives us flexibility. Every one of us have a mobile phone on us right now. And for years, the charging system of these mobile phones have been all over the place. So if you have a Sony, you have one charging system. If you have an Apple, you have one charging system. Finally, the business have started to realize that we need one charging system for cell phones. That gives us flexibility. In Europe, the Bologna process, which has been kept going now for 20 odd years, is a success because of standardization. It's standardization on quality assurance. It's standardization on the degree level, the 3+2+3. It's standardization on the credit system, the ECTS, the European Credit Transfer System. That is the vehicle that has driven flexibility in Europe. So there is a paradox here that we really need to explore. I think we are all afraid of having to be exposed to new standards coming from somewhere and from other countries or from international level or globalization or whatever. But at some point we need to realize also that standards actually brings the world forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I can agree that the quality comes first for higher education institutions, because if you don't have quality, relevance is not relevant already. So thank you very much for this very valuable insights. And now let's listen to the faculty perspectives. Now, Mundbosen, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Susanna. My focus is more into the geographical dimension, as you said, of most of the findings of the research. And I'll particularly be talking about how much the findings of the research echo to the African context. And it so happens that, surprisingly, most of the challenges that continue to plague the African higher education system are those which were somehow discussed and outlined in the 2019 World Conference, the conference before this. And most of these still happen to be serious challenges even nowadays. I think understanding the African higher education context requires at least a very brief note of how the profile of the whole continent's higher education system is like. For most of you who might be aware, this is sometimes regarded as an underdeveloped system for many decades because of the different kinds of problems related to structural changes and some wrong assumptions as well. Nowadays, we have around 1,682 higher education institutions in Africa, which represent only 9% of higher education institutions globally. Figure for Asia, North America, Europe, Latin America is completely different from this, as you might possibly know. We've only 15 million students in the whole continent, which is around 6.6% of the global more than 220 million students. The gross enrollment ratio is around 9.4%, again below the global average of 38%, 42% in Middle East and North America, 52% in Latin America, 70% in Europe and Central Asia, 86% in North America. So you could look at the types of problems that we're facing in terms of where we are and where we would like to go. So there are issues of not only access, but issues of equity, diversity, and conflict, which somehow affect whatever discussions we are making within the context of the African higher education institutions. Most of the findings of the study actually echo some of the challenges that Africa is facing, but we would see that Africa has a lot more in terms of depth and in terms of the number of challenges that we have. If you look at, for instance, quality assurance, it's new to the continent, and we would see that there is a lot of misunderstanding about the concept itself. There are a limited number of trained professional staff in the field, a lack of knowledge about the process. There is lack of resistance as well. And many institutions are not even making use of the new developments with regard to quality assurance, especially in keeping with the internal quality assurance systems, which are somehow creating the institutional culture gradually into other systems. We have also very lack of the concept of qualification frameworks and the type of qualification frameworks we have are very, very rare in the continent as well. Again, the finding related to the disconnect with the needs and the skill demands of the economy, I would say that this is highly pronounced in our context. Current patterns of skill production in Africa do not match the labor market demands or development needs, which reflect on the relevance issue. Lack of soft skills, mismatched knowledge, and job requirement is another common problem. I think one research especially which was done in 36 African countries pointed out that there is a mismatch between university degrees awarded and career pathways, such as telecommunications, engineering, agriculture, information technology, health, banking, and education. Research also has found out that in many tertiary education graduates in Africa are very weak in problem solving, business understanding, computer use, and communication skills, which shows that there is a lot to be done yet in this area. So this has somehow opened, as many people would say, a Pandora box for both society and industry to question the words of university graduates and the words of university education as well. But the blame is not only on the institutions, it also goes back to the industries and the business, which always would like to have graduates, ready-made graduates, without putting their efforts and their participation into the scene. We have also, which you might be aware of, lack of funding and infrastructure and facilities, which are very, very serious challenges. Even the new technology that you've been talking about, we've not been able to make use of it as much as we would like to because of the different challenges with regard to skills, regards to access, regards to cost, mobile coverage, or whatever you have. Again, we have a very serious problem in terms of lack of qualified and trained faculty as well. The number of PhD holders in many public universities of Africa is far below 20%. Senior professors are very, very rare. And there are also many responsibilities, as shown in the research findings, where teachers are expected to respond to, but the kind of readiness, especially their professional competency, is very limited to respond to current challenges. Issues of recognition, issues of incentives are also practical problems. And we also have this issue of high rates of migration of talent, which is affecting many of our universities. We have also this problem of the curriculum and the learner, which has already been touched upon. So curricula, there are learners who are currently demanding, as elsewhere, that whatever they learn in classrooms must be applicable to the real world. The pool of traditional students, those aged between 18 and 24, is coming down, as in the rest of the world, where 70% are much more than these traditional groups. Many students are demanding training in multidisciplinary fields of studies. And there are also these societal pressures, the movements that we know of. Me Too, Rods Must Fall, Black Lives Matter, all these have their own pressures in terms of what should be done at universities and in terms of how we should deliver. But this has been a serious challenge, and teachers are not like the old days expected to sit down and simply develop curricula out of the blue, but they are required to attend to all these needs, which are becoming very much demanding on the part of the teachers. Now, again, we have this final problem of governance and leadership, which is also a very practical problem in our institutions, as has been shown in the research findings. The autonomy and academic freedom of the academic community is usually threatened, and working in such contexts in terms of what you would like to deliver or what the institution would like to deliver is a serious issue. Interventions are quite common in terms of even prescribing contents and methods that can be mostly inconsistent with the aims of the academic community. So these are the whole type of challenges that we see in Africa, and in the bid to leave no one behind, I think it's always important to consider what the broader findings of the research would mean in terms of specific contexts like Africa, where we need to see in detail each of the problems and what they mean to the context of Africa, and how we would be able to deliver later on to deliver at the end of the day. Thank you very much, Sana.
Thank you very much, Winboston. I would say that it's not only in Africa. Those issues that you have raised are applicable in many of the regions, and creating a conducive environment for faculty members to research, to work on the teaching and learning methodologies moreover, to explore, to research into the teaching and learning methodologies and see what works and what not is the key. In many of my workshops, I would ask, how many of you are asking your students how you learn? We have to understand how they learn. We have to explore that so that the methodologies and faculty members should be enabled, empowered to carry out that task. Thank you very much. Now we give the floor to the accreditors. Cynthia, your perspectives.
Thank you. And thank you, UNESCO, for inviting me to be a part of this distinguished panel. I am going to talk to you a little bit about the impact of programs, not as an isolated or independent factor, but also in connection with the institution. What happens in America is that the institution must follow a certain set of guidelines. And I say must because there's an expectation regarding quality assurance at the institutional level. So if the institution level is impacted in some way, so is the program or the programs of that institution. I have identified 3 factors that are consistent challenges to quality assurance in the United States at the institution and program levels. These 3 factors are sometimes independent of each other, and other times they are very dependent. Let's examine factor number 1, political and economic drivers and inconsistency of influence. Now, I'm going to give you a 3-minute précis about how American government works. Am I not brilliant or what to do this in 3 minutes? Actually, what we are looking at is that every 4 years, Americans have an opportunity to voice their preference through a referendum of the president. State representatives are voted on every 2 years, and state senators every 6 years. Depending on the social, political, cultural, and economic conditions, Americans may experience significant changes in the way America puts emphasis on support for quality and higher education. So there's a fluctuation there. Conservatives tend to be traditional in their philosophies and federal expenditures, and liberals tend to be more expansive philosophically in their approach to expenditures. Whichever party controls the Congress, there's an opportunity to support the agenda of the president or not support. The same holds true for state governments. Is there a conservative or liberal state agenda? The prevailing agenda often has direct impact on the influences of higher education at the institution level and ergo the program level. There is no one consistent philosophy about the way higher education is funded at the state level. 50 states, they all fund higher education differently. And in that difference, there could be an inconsistency from year to year, depending on who's in office. Higher education often must make the determination about institutions' operations based on politics and based on the economies. What's driving the economies? Which programs in your institutions are driving the economies? I suggest to you that quality assurance might take a secondary emphasis depending on which political group is driving the economic goals at that time. So that inconsistency certainly has impact on what decisions are being made at the institutional level and what decisions are being made at the program level. So quality today looks one way. 4 years from now, it may look differently. There's an inconsistency there. Technology is the flavor of the day, but will it be the flavor 4 years from now? The second concern is the inattentiveness of the administrative leadership. According to data provided by Higher Education Direct, college presidents, chancellors, and provosts are among the top 3 administrators with the highest turnover. The 3 top areas in higher ed that make the institutional decisions and sometimes the program decisions have the highest turnover. So there's not a consistency in the beliefs or the philosophical approaches to quality. College presidents are impacted by internal and external influences that are political and certainly based on, again, the economy. Leadership often focuses on the business operations, and that takes precedence sometimes over the assurance of quality at the institution and program levels. The average tenure of college presidents in 2016 was only 6.5 years, down from 7 years in 2011. The average tenure was 8.5. So 6.5 is the average in America, leadership and higher ed. What does that say about who's setting the strategic plan, who is establishing quality assurance throughout the institution? And if it is a result of high change between leadership, then that is a challenge for consistency. I do not want to assert that higher education leaders in America are not supportive of quality assurance, but I am asserting, based on the data from the American Association of Schools, Colleges, and Universities, that the business of fundraising, political networking, fiscal management, cultural shifts, social politics become more dynamic and require more attention than quality assurance. So the inattentiveness to quality assurance suggests that if leadership has a diversity and dynamic array of challenges, who sets the agenda? Who sets the strategic focus? Typically, when college leadership, presidents or provosts come into office, the first question they are asked, what is the vision? What is your vision for the institution? In a survey conducted by ACE, we found that presidents talk about keeping the doors open, economic solvency, financial stability, academic quality, quality assurance sort of falls lower. It does not mean, again, that that's not of interest, that it's not a focus, but where does it rank in the priorities of administrative leadership? And then lastly, expectations from students and families. There is a growing trend of students viewing the college experience and higher education institution as a smorgasbord of choices. They are more adept at finding institutions that are more aligned with their own personal expectations. And those expectations are not always about education. It is more about the experience that comes with the educational process. With a decline in student enrollment, as reported by the National Student Clearinghouse, institutions are competing and investing their dollars and resources in services that may have very little to do with direct education and learning outcomes. what's going to attract the student is not always the education experience, but all of those other services or experiences that's provided. That might be in the form of building a new swimming pool at the campus, athletics, exchanges, all of those other activities. And students in America are very apt at picking institutions that fulfill their personal interests. Not always about the education process. They want education that is not for knowledge and growth necessarily, but an education that would lead to an economic prosperity. So what happens to quality assurance when the demands, expectations of students and families take precedence? Furthermore, do the prevailing economies and political philosophies provide the overarching influence of the people? And finally, does quality assurance suffer because of these different types of disruptors? Is quality assurance compromised because of students' position as consumers? Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was really very interesting to hear two different perspectives, like Bern talking about quality as the first priority, and accreditors, after having looked at the overall institutional setup in the US, saying that, well, quality might not be the first item on the agenda. Inconsistency is something that is prevalent. And one of the major findings of this study is the inconsistency and incoherence, and it's prevalent across all the regions globally. So let's listen now to the policymakers, the government. So, Your Excellency, the floor is yours to hear from what the regulators are saying.
Greeting for all, greetings Susana and all my partners of this panel discussion. A special greeting to the rectors and students from Colombia that are here in this discussion. Thank you to UNESCO to have the opportunity to share our quality assurance system in Colombia. And now I represent not only Colombian boys, I represent Latin American boys. In consequence, I will do my presentation in English and in Spanish. The last 4 years, we have been working a lot with the university and institutions to transform the quality policy and the regulatory mark. In this sense, Colombia have undertaken regulatory reforms to have allowed a stepping forward in quality assurances. The process was very participatory, was inclusive, where all actors of the academic community contribute of the collective construction. Second, I was recognized and placed as a fundamental factor to be embraced by the system, the diversity of the institutions, and also the importance of how institutions express their identity, their mission, nature, and typology. This is the main point of the diversity of our programs, so cultural environment, productive and different contexts, face-to-face program, distant programs, virtual programs, dual or combination. These instruments focus on the transversal incorporation of learning icons. The reform innovates by incorporating the possibility that institutions can obtain single quality registration, promoting the use of national system and information in higher education, the optimization of national and institutional resource, guiding halts in their internal quality assurance system, generate conditions to enable students and teachers to perform globally, and at the same time to their knowledge could contribute to the development and growth in the specific regions in Colombia. Create mechanisms to impact positively in the autonomy and the political in higher education. Este trabajo de 4 años consecutivos.
This labor of 4 years was participatory. We listened to all the different members in terms of the importance of linking the work of governments and institutions. We were hearing a while ago about how the political leanings can have an influence on what attention is paid to this process. But these issues go beyond political preferences. So we were working on this prior to the pandemic, looking at priorities and methodologies for higher education. Conclusions from this process. Well, normative change, a transformation, it's not just a 4-year thing, it allows for long-term transformation. Secondly, networks of knowledge amongst academic peers and teachers and decision makers and authorities who have to understand what's coming in higher education. Thirdly, strengthening the link between governments and quality assurance bodies. We set up a permanent committee involving the rectors or chancellors, the quality assurance bodies and the government, and the voice of students. It was crucial to hear the voice of students on methodologies and on complementary social capital beyond academic programs and offerings. We set up a laboratory made available to all of Latin America with the national and Latin American practices, talking about transformation and technology in the academic core programs, in the well-being programs, and in complementary programs in order to highlight learning achievements. Talking about learning achievement was controversial at the outset because it sounded as though it was just a matter of succeeding in examinations, official state examinations at the end of the process. The point was to link higher education to other achievements in the social sphere and the well-being sphere, emotional sphere as well, and also looking at the path taken by students. So we also put to debate in this panel a number of issues for the future. First of all, flexible paths for learning. This has been emphasized by others. And they also can be based on different program methodologies and on setting it within national qualifications frameworks. In Europe and in the United States, this is a long-standing asset. Latin America is only starting to work on that, and it has to lead to changes in public and private universities and higher education institutions, looking at how to recognize skills and the like within a system that allows for certification that will provide assistance for employment, but that will not lose sight of the higher education path. We have to listen to employers. There's no, it's not either higher education or lifelong learning. It's really important to look at lifelong learning and the importance of technology and how to articulate that with education programs. Second challenge, understand and appropriate institutions. There are different kinds of institutions with different kinds of approaches. Some are approach training professionals, others are more focused on research and the like. We need to look at all these objectives and look at information systems, with data on employment and possibilities, support, inclusion, gender equality, and so many other factors that are crucial to really enabling young people to find attractive offerings. How to create incentives for certain modes. We set up this normative framework a year before the pandemic, but it created a lot of possibilities for universities to generate offerings that could be either virtual and online or on-site or hybrid at different levels, undergraduate and graduate, and also combining use of technology when on-site. Lastly, it's really important to train those involved. We've heard here from university leadership, from faculties, from quality assurance bodies, and you're hearing from me representing government. Every stakeholder has to play their role. And it's important to create a system that allows for objective qualification within the quality assurance system and also change trends towards the future. Lastly, last recommendation, how to ensure quality assurance within institutions. This is something that's been done for some time in Europe and the United States. It's a huge challenge in Latin America. Setting up a system for standing evaluation of institutions, so with a good quality assurance system. This is important. So because of the importance of education in Latin America, we have to talk about quality, we have to talk about flexibility, and we have to structure the resources of governments, local and national, and the resources of universities so that they really have the kind of flexibility that is needed for institutions of higher education.
Really taken by the fact how Colombian system is actually looking at the measurement of learning outcome achievement and how this has become a priority item on the government agenda even, and all the institutions and quality assurance bodies over there are discussing measurement of the core. So this is very much welcome. And also you were talking about the diversity, embracing the diversity, and at the same time supporting Bern's statement about standardization of the key elements that need recognition, mobility, portability. So this is something that needs to be really, we have to come up with really elegant solutions on how to put these two together. And I think that we have very good representation here to think further about those developments. In the interest of time, we have 20 minutes left. I wanted to have more interaction, but I will be putting these policy recommendations on the screen now and open up the floor for discussion so that we could all contribute to it. And please, let's discuss on how these different policy recommendations would be applicable in your own context. Basically, the first recommendation refers to systemic and institutional level changes that they need to be made coherent and sustainable. We have been listening here about inconsistencies and how the inconsistencies, incoherencies in the development are ruining the system. Second is the key for us as quality assurance providers. Quality assurance has matured enough. And the definition of quality, if 30 years ago we were saying, well, the definition of quality is fluid, we're mature enough to come up with to redefine the quality assurance and quality assurance practices, to embrace this diversity, and to also cover, like Bern has been mentioning a lot of times, how do we address the bureaucratization? How do we address all the dilemmas we have with quality assurance while making quality priority on the agenda? Programs. Again, here, the key, the core, the main course, this is the diversification, embracing diversification. How do our systems position themselves when it comes to diversification of the program in the formal, non-formal, informal modalities? How do we link them with each other? How do we help the students to pursue the flexible learning and to pursue the entry and exit of the institution at any time they would like, to make sure they also can carry those credentials to different spheres, to industry, to further education. We need to come up with the solutions. There is a huge body of industry representatives who are stepping in to offer the credentials, which are sort of gap in the higher education, in the formal higher education. How do we link those two together? Faculty, this is the core. If we don't have the faculty whom we are happy with, we will not have the students or the graduates we are happy with. We have to be working on the faculty. We have to make them happy so that they could make the students happy. And recognition of credentials is the core. If we are producing something and they're not recognized, what do we do? There are a lot of systems globally that, even within the same country, they don't recognize each other's degrees. So how do we deal with these recognition issues? Thankfully, and UNESCO has been working hard on the regional recognition conventions, which started in the 1970s, but in those recognition conventions, they didn't have quality assurance as a major one of the key tools. They have been all revised. The 5 recognition regional conventions have been all revised, and quality assurance has the key role in it. and also the Global Recognition Convention has a key role for quality assurance. So how do we put it into practice? What are the implementation tools? How do we link it all together? How do we make qualifications framework relevant? They were developed like years ago, and they have been there for years, untouched, majority of them. Are they still relevant? If they're not relevant, how come our programs are relevant? Basically, these are the recommendations there, and I would like to open the floor to the audience and to the panel, and to reflect on the recommendations and how that would be relevant in your own context. Shall we start from the panel? Any reflection? Douglas.
Thanks, Susanna. Douglas Blackstock. I'm the President of the European Association for Quality Assurance and previously 20 years in the UK's Quality Agency. Thank you for the panel for your contributions, and I recognised many of the issues that I think they're transferable into many countries. And I hope, Susanna, this is the start of the debate and the discussion, because the documents have only just been made available, and thank you for all the work you've done. I'd like to pick up on a few things. Is that we are, by the way, I'm absolutely in the camp personally of innovation and change in quality assurance. But the difference is I come from a nation that's had quality assurance in some form or other for hundreds of years. But I've got members who are only just establishing their external quality systems. We've got the the Bologna process was mentioned, and it is a huge success. It is a remarkable achievement to bring together 49 countries with different legal systems, different languages, and agree a common set of principles. But it can only work if it remains at the principle level, because quality assurance has to be done differently according to the national context. Because in European terms of subsidiarity, national governments, politicians want to control their own systems. So we need to find pathways that help us to work. I think the other big challenge that you mentioned around quality and relevance of programs, I think the fundamental way that programs can be relevant is institutional autonomy. Institutions having the rights to determine the content of their own degrees within national frameworks. Because there's a famous question from where I come from in the UK, in Parliament. The Vice-Chancellors of Oxford and Oxford Brookes University were asked, are your degrees in history the same? And of course, all of us in higher education went, of course they're not, they're different. They're comparable, but they're different because the subject content comes from the researchers, from the backgrounds, from the relevance to the students. So I think these are huge challenges, but through sharing of practice, through cooperation, I think we can make a lot of progress. And I think that this is brilliant that you're putting these discussions on the table.
Thank you very much. Very insightful. And I can agree more with you about the notion you had on, sorry, I forgot at this point. Yeah, okay, I'll come back to that. So yes, please.
No, just to respond to that, I think coming back to the Bologna process once again, I don't want to make this into a European thing, but I think you are pointing at something important here. I mean, the Bologna process is soft governance. It's not hard governance. I mean, when I say it's a success, yes, of course, in many ways it is a success, but are all the 49 countries, are they alike? Of course not. Have they adopted to Bologna in the same way? Of course not. I mean, the UK is a very good example, I think, of a different approach. So I think soft governance is really the key, and I think what we now see in different parts of the world is that, I mean, maybe globalization has taken a break for a while, but regionalization is still very much alive. We can see it in Europe, we can see it in South America, we can see it in parts of Asia. So we can definitely see that there is an interest in working together, but perhaps in a smaller, more tightly knit community. And what is interesting, at least from my point of view, is to see that some of these standards that are coming out of different regions, they are also starting to align. So there is some kind of movement from the bottom up, actually. Yeah. So for those who think that globalization is something that happens from the top down, it's actually the other way around. So I think the work that has been done now on recognition and similar thing by UNESCO is really important.
Yeah, I can't agree more about the convergence that we're coming up with when it comes to the standards and the special regional developments. And linked to that, to respond to Douglas's remark on institutional autonomy and independence, when we look at the standards globally, quality assurance standards, and as per the CHEP's recent research, they have analyzed, they looked at the quality assurance standards and to what extent academic freedom and institutional autonomy is part of those standards. And unfortunately, not all the systems are looking at it. So this is why we're talking about reimagining and redesigning quality assurance, and redefinition of quality assurance is so important to make sure that we are bringing these absolute academic values like academic freedom, the necessities for the academia to survive, to innovate, to create. We have to make it the core of the quality assurance and quality definition. Yes.
If I may add on the issue of autonomy, I think it's a relative term, and we need to see how much this autonomy blends with the issue of accountability as well. We've reached at a point where governments or external stakeholders are not ready enough to leave everything to institutions. So institutions will have to understand that. And the most important thing about autonomy as regards to universities is not because they want to remain islands, but they are more talking about the level of intervention, the level of, the extreme level of intervention that governments and other stakeholders are making into this. So too much interventions would kill flexibility, would kill innovation, as you said, and would definitely endanger the whole issue of quality assurance as well. So we need to see this in terms of the balance.
The balance between autonomy and accountability is paramount.
Sí, yo quisiera notar sobre el tema la importancia.
On this topic, I would like to highlight the importance of harmonizing autonomy and independence with accountability. I mean, autonomy is essential, but we do have to accept the role of accreditation bodies and governments for mutual understanding of what we want in terms of quality. We can move that way on a regional scale in order to then go international. Regionally, we have several quality assurance bodies in Latin America. So with all this whole movement towards flexibility of methodology, well, what we're doing is strengthening ourselves so that we can work, locally and regionally, and then we'll go on to the globalization that we need for our students' mobility. So I think that would be the challenge.
You were waiting, sorry. No,
Thank
please
you.
go first.
Okay. Thank you. I too want to echo how important it is to have institutional autonomy, and that the quality assurance standards are really specific, but at the same time they are very general and broad, so that each institution, depending on its institutional needs, its culture, the students that they are preparing for the economy of that region, has an opportunity to design evidence to show quality assurance. So it's not one size fits all. The standards are there, but how you demonstrate evidence of success with those standards should certainly be independent.
Absolutely.
Sure. I would like to bring a different angle. I'm from the industry, so I think it's why spending a lot of time on talking about quality assurance. Perhaps it's time to think what will be the real objective of education. I think if we think about health is not conditioned by our DNA. It's conditioned by our zip code, where we live. Education is the best tool to create a better society. And I feel a lot of a disalignment between the trainers, education, and the industry. For example, it has changed a lot of things. Through pandemic, for example, in the case of Google, what is saying, I prefer to hire one person that is not trained in a typical university in 3 months' time with Coursera. For me, fantastic for me. Do we have our trainers ready for this kind of new context? The first question. Secondly, there are some specific things that should be on our curriculum today. What's resilience? No, the Neil government thought about 23, 30 years ago. Life is a long journey. Frustration, no? resilience. These soft skills are not part of some humanism, no? We have the huge opportunity to change things thanks to technology, but we need to bring this humanization use of technology in the agendas. In addition to that, apologize, instead of giving answers, I'm trying to ask more questions. I do believe that it's a question of how you foresee or you think in a business plan. If you're in a corporate, your business plan should be around 2-3 years' time. If you're a government, it should be 5 to 10 at least, no?
Yeah.
Except that every 4 years, depending on the country, perhaps you will not be there more, no? But it's this generosity. Education is the best tool. It's how. So instead of thinking assurance, quality, why not we spend more time on what should be the education in the future? What should be the higher education? Vernon was an economist that said, okay, each economy sets in a country that's competitive for that, in terms of talent, in terms of cost. So I'm sure the country, Colombia, is very good in specific sectors, very different to Argentina or very different to London, and education will help there. And we have a lot of barriers and a lot of challenge worldwide. The working environment has changed through the window. We are involving people, instead of the people who have spent 20 years working with us, there are people that's abroad and is working with my company in Colombia that perhaps is in Dubai. How we think, how we help our trainers to understand this new context. How many of you have spent the last years reskilling yourself? In which areas? So I do believe that instead, apologize if I'm sure that you will invite me more. I think it's important to talk about this inconsistency, okay, this quality assurance by why do we, in which KPIs we want to be measured today? So going back to scientist knowledge, where I'm building the conditions to transform and to promote a mocktail-based economy in Europe, creating the conditions, this coexistence. Industry works with researchers, but European research is measured by number of productions. Do you think it's the right way? Perhaps we should talk basic research, of course. We should talk about the impact. At the end, it's finding the midpoints, speaking different languages. How many of you have worked apart in university and the schools? The same researchers, no? Or the industry. So I think it's a question of setting bridges, but I would start this conversation thinking what kind of country, what kind of sectors, what kind of people, employability, how many industry are coming to Colombia to get some in this international. So I would propose to add a foreign panel, of course. And
definitely, revision of the quality standards needs to be done with the engagement of industry representatives. So we have the audience, yeah, right? Question? Yeah, 1, 2, 3, yeah. We will, 4, okay.
Another question made by Sterling.
Okay.
Thank you, and thank you for all the comments. I'm Leonardo Lima. I'm part of IFC. I'm an education specialist at IFC. And we have developed a tool at IFC called the employability tool, right? And so shifting gears to what Oscar had just mentioned, and centering this connection to employability, as you mentioned, no? We run a survey among all stakeholders, and to student and alumni, one of the top reasons that they join a university or they want to advance their studies are to get a better job, to get a better salary, and third, to really for personal development. So when we think about these priorities, where is really the employability in the center here? We work specifically with emerging markets. And so some of the best practices, like when we talk about work-integrated learning modalities and program advisory committees, they're something very new to the context of Latin America and Africa in particular. So I think it's very relevant to what you're saying. I'm just wanted to echo these relevance of connection to the industry and finding ways that the education really needs to be aligned with the job market necessities. You know. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, yes. And we have 2 questions also from the online audience, which are pending here. So please, panel members, we will come back to this as a closing part.
Buenas, yo vengo de Cuba.
Hello, I'm from Cuba. I've been working as a member of the region. I'm a member of an accreditation agency in Cuba, the Cuban agency. There's something I'd like to raise which has been mentioned, but which I think is absolutely essential. Articulation with the environment, the setting is important, and it's been mentioned, but we have a huge challenge in terms of articulation with the whole education system, and especially the education levels prior to higher education, which we need to continue to prioritize. Something else we've been working and sharing good practices on, but we need to keep working on. And it's about management systems in higher education institutions. There are quality assurance and quality management systems so that, as they achieve the relevant levels of development, they can become completely responsible for the quality of what is taking place within the institution. Quality assurance bodies will continue to do our work, but our work should be to support, to provide guidance, to train, and so forth. Thank you.
Of course, holistic approach across all the levels is of paramount importance here. We have, okay, I don't know the sequence already, sorry. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Representative of Quality Assurance from Lithuania. Very many resonating points that I heard here, but I would like to touch something that sounded quite interesting, probably mostly referring to America, quality assurance life, all that landscape. We quite often speak about diversification of needs, but there is a very thin line to diversification of wants or desires. As we see stakeholders who are interested not in study but study-related activities, we have studies showing that average number of hours spent per week decreases. So also a provocative question, is the CTS the same? We have 60 CTS a year, but people study less. So how do we deal with that? Because we talk about overall, let's say, regulating framework, but the contents is sometimes driven by those who give finances, who choose, who vote by attending universities, and how should we deal with that? I think that even industry should be quite concerned what we are going to get in the future if they study less, if they want, let's say, more free time, but probably salaries not lower, maybe even higher. So that's another aspect probably we will have to face sometime.
Agree? A specific question or just...
So maybe you have some insights how we could deal with that, where we have that in the sideline of recommendations, or how can we address that quality aspect, that content aspect?
Okay, thank you very much. Bernd, you want to address it because it's CTS from European region?
Okay, how do you tackle that kind of situation? And it resonates also to what we heard from the US, that students' ambitions perhaps are very diverse, and at least part of the student population are not always seeking for the highest academic levels for something else. This is where I think the responsibility of the individual institutions comes into play. We talk sometimes also about quality cultures. I've been skeptical about what is a quality culture from time to time, but what we do know from research on higher learning is that the way teachers teach really determines the way students learn. Mm-hmm. So it's something also about the responsibility of the academics here, also not to give in to some of these expectations coming from students, to hold up the standards. I think this is an academic responsibility. I'm not quite sure that all universities are good enough in underlying that kind of responsibility, because universities say that we are responsible for quality, but then we are not really good in keeping in line and making sure that the academic staff is really equipped and really focused on keeping that, because it has to be maintained at the micro level. So I think it's an institutional responsibility, and there is evidence, anecdotal, but also some systematic evidence showing that student active learning, that's something that one of these concepts that are flying around. Students are not interested in student active learning. When they understand what student active learning actually means, it means that they have to do more work. A lot of the times students would like to lean back and take in a lecture, and I think they learn a lot from that. We have hard evidence that they don't learn that much from lectures that they think they do. So we need to re-engage the student in some of these activities, and it's basically an institutional responsibility, and from the micro perspective, it's also a faculty responsibility. And I have no better answer than that, because we have to work from the micro level, I think.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, very briefly. No, briefly, go ahead. Because
I want to concur in the fact that students do want to be engaged, but they really want the faculty member to be engaged. You know, sometimes we refer to them as lazy learners. But the reality is that we are looking at how students learn and what can they do as a result of that learning. If it's just a matter of passing an exam or passing a test, that's not active learning. That does not necessarily result in them being able to demonstrate proficiency in a particular course or curriculum. So I think that there is a trend, or there is a leaning toward portfolio outcomes, and some of the disciplines certainly require exams, licensure exams, in order to perform. So there are extreme options, I shouldn't say extreme options, there are many options to demonstrate how a student learns, and that does rest with what they do in the classroom and what they are able to do after they have left the classroom. So regardless of whether or not they come with the interest of, I want to be on the soccer team, I want to be in this club, I want to do this, the main purpose is in the responsibility of teaching and learning. How do you engage them at a level that they feel actively responsible for their own learning?
Or how do you make their eyes sparkle?
Yes.
This is something that we need to think about. Briefly, and then we covered the questions from the audience, and I'm sorry, we're being pushed from the outside, this next session participants.
Solo 3 mensajes.
Just 3 messages to understand a whole trajectory, to put higher education before a great challenge. UNESCO has said this in its document about challenges for the future. Here we're talking about the quality of higher education, but we need to think also about the role of universities after this pandemic, and to imagine the gap that exists and what schools can do about this. Then secondly, reimagining relations with the productive sector and get beyond this idea that there is no fluid relationship between academics and the productive sector. We have to think about routes for training, about curricula, and to allow people to have softer landings and see what is necessary for that. Universities can have many more programs along these lines. And we're also talking about the idea about relations between data systems on unemployment, on the social panorama of students, about various metrics for socioeconomic parameters, and to see that these quality parameters become transcendent and this be part of the learning process, and that if we have this type of process, that will be a great internal change in universities about the way of teaching the materials and about the timing and the place in the form of intermediation.
online audience, and the second one is more of a feedback. But the first one, why is it necessary to quality assure micro-credentials? I understand and support the need to quality assure. So from the panel, Bern.
You don't have to have a quality assurance system on micro-credentials. I mean, for me, micro-credentials can be on-the-job training, can be a lot of things. Yeah. But if you have learners, and if you want to create flexible learning pathways where someone wants to take the micro-credentials with them into something else and build some kind of broader qualifications, well, then you need to know, okay, what are these broader qualifications made up of? Yeah. So if quality assurance is supposed to be informal forever, fine, no problem. But if you want to use it for a formal qualification, you have to have quality assurance.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everybody. I would like to extend my thanks to the distinguished panel. Very nice job. And whoever, I know you still have many questions, but we can still socialize outside this room. Thank you very much, everybody, and we look forward to working more with you. Thank you. Thank you.